Oh, hello there. You are listening to the TTP Field Manual podcast, where we talk a lot about Warhammer, tabletop RPGs, normal RPGs, and stuff like that. I am your host, as always, Joshy. Today, this episode, it's just me. It's just me here chatting with you, chatting with myself. You know how it goes. Typically, when the episode is just me, it's going to be a Lore Bites episode. And that's exactly what the episode is once more, Lore Bites. What is the Lore Bites on? Space Wolves. Bloody hell. Why Space Wolves? Because y'all seem to really, really like Space Wolves. The last episode of Space Wolves Lore, featuring Logan Grimnar, Arjac Rockfist, and Njal. Really popular episode. Super popular. Did really well. Very happy with it. So, thought today I would do a part 2. Typically, when I do these Lore Bites, I want episodes to have the character featured to still have a presence in the hobby or the tabletop. Sometimes we have models such as Gabriel Seth, which aren't really in the present setting, but have been. But today's Space Wolves, sure, still do exist. We're going to be talking about Ragnar Blackmane. We're going to be talking about Ulrik the Slayer. And we're going to be talking about Bjorn the Fell-Handed. But before we get into it, you know how it goes. We're going to be doing a little bit of show notes. Keep it nice and brief for y'all today. Links. Links in bio. Links everywhere. We got Discord community server. It's a really fun time. We sharing works in progress, having little chats about the lore. We got voice chats that people can hop in and just have a little how you going. That's fun. Instagram, TTP Field Manual. It's all there. YouTube, very new addition to our bunch of links. We have the podcast in audio format now on YouTube as well, if you like to listen to things in the background. And we have a landing website where you'll find a lot of our collections of links and episodes as they go up. Final show note is that the August book club is the Warhammer 40k novel Requiem Infernal, a Adepta Sororitas novel. It's a bit eerie. It's a bit unreliable narrator. I'm quite enjoying it. Heck yeah. Links in bio, book club, get to it. Alright, Space Wolves. I have spoken and read up a lot on Space Wolves this week. Prior to me recording this episode, Jonny and I had a 3 frickin' hour long recording that I'll have to edit very soon, where we really dive into the new Space Wolves Codex Supplement. That episode will come out after this one. Prior to that, I've been reading deep into the wiki entries, little lore summaries of other Space Wolves. My head is so full of Space Wolves, and I'm going to get it out. Let's start with Ragnar Blackmane. Now, Ragnar Blackmane, otherwise known as the Black Wolf or the Young Wolf, he has existed as a character in the setting since the earliest days, the Rogue Trader era. Now, Ragnar is quite possibly the Space Wolf character with the most lore written in the form of novels, novelizations of his saga. There are about 8 books off the top of my head that Ragnar is featured in. He has his own saga, which is 6 books long, that has started from the earlier 2000s, where the Black Library writing style was a bit more pulpy. It was a bit more different in the sort of energy of the setting than what we have now in the 2020s. He has another book that we'll get into a bit after that, and then a very brief little mention about what he's doing in the most current setting after that. I'm not going to talk too much in detail about Ragnar in very specific, minute details. I'm just going to be giving a brief overview. I don't want to spoil everything, all the nitty-gritty of the books that he's featured in. I will be mentioning which book I'm talking about as I go along. If you want to stop at any point in the episode to go, preserve your mind of this information, you prefer to read it, listen to it, that's okay. If you're still here, let us continue. So Ragnar's story starts more or less with the novel Space Wolf. Now, much like other named Space Wolves, and this is quite a trend, Ragnar was a barbaric youth who had to fight off a rival tribe long before he was selected to be a Space Wolf. The barbarians of Fenris live a pretty crap life. The environment's trying to get them, rival tribes are going to get them. Sometimes the Thousand Sons invade and try and get them. But Ragnar was a barbaric youth who had to fight off a rival tribe. Of course, he was one of the last survivors of his tribe, and he would almost be killed himself. This would be prevented, of course, by a wolf priest, the spiritual leaders of the Space Wolf Marines. A Space Wolf priest would save both Ragnar and his killers' lives as Ragnar went down swinging. Ragnar's unbridled hatred at the fact that his killer was also inducted into the Space Wolves was almost his undoing, as when Space Wolves are going through their initiations, they have to pass through the gates of Morkai, a sort of trial of willpower. And this hatred almost tipped Ragnar to the sides of chaos, where he would of course then be dealt with if that would be the case. However, he reined it in. He did okay. He put the hatred under wraps. Succeeding in the trials, he would become a Bloodclaw trainee. Ragnar and his old nemesis Stribion, the person who almost slew him in a previous life, discovered a secret base below the mountains of Fenris that was belonging to a somewhat sleeper cell of Thousand Sons. And the novel is these two essentially teaming up to banish the Thousand Sons from Fenris. Ragnar's story would continue in the novel Ragnar's Claws, where Ragnar's first actual missions included aiding an inquisitor who was trying to essentially prevent a chaos mutation, a chaos plague, if you will, from corrupting a world. The talisman needed to help prevent it was an Eldari artifact split into fragments across the galaxy, with Ragnar and the Inquisitor going into conflicts with a world overrun by orcs, a space hulk infected by gene stealers, and things of that nature before the final confrontation with the demon responsible. Ragnar's next outing would be in the novel Grey Hunter. So for context to this story, once upon a time, there would be a Space Wolves lord named Garm. Garm would personally defend Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves, from Magnus the Red by wielding Leman's own Spear of Russ against Magnus. Of course, he would not survive, and his sacrifice would lead to the planet of Garm being named in his honor, and the spear would be entombed at his shrine. The Thousand Sun sorcerer named Maddox, the key antagonist from Ragnar's earliest outing in his first novel, would return to the stage to steal the spear and attempt a ritual to bring Magnus out into the materium. Ragnar, of course, would defeat Maddox and would actually throw the Spear of Russ into the opening warp rift, preventing, of course, the ritual from going off, preventing Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Sons, from entering real space. But in doing so would, lose the Spear of Russ. Not great. And that's the first sort of trilogy of Ragnar. Very pulpy, very villain of the week. Very much on brand with the earlier styles of Space Marine novels. Now, I personally haven't read them. I would like to think there's a bit more finer detail, a bit more nuance about Space Wolf culture. And that's okay. I want this episode to be a bit of a primer, to sort of, dangle the carrot like, oh, does this sound cool? Would you like to go ahead and read it yourself? But we're going to keep going with Ragnar's story. This would take us to the fourth book in his saga, a novel titled Wolfblade. This one interests me most of all. The next bit of literature for Ragnar was this novel, but it's styled as a bit of a flashback after an initial prologue with Ragnar saving the survivors of his own personal wolf guard from a surprise Thousand Suns ambush. It's always the bloody Thousand Suns, isn't it? Wolfblade details how, after losing the Spear of Russ, Ragnar is sent away despite his innocence by Logan Grimnar to ease the tension of the chapter. In defending his wolf guard from the Thousand Suns ambush, we're introduced to him having his iconic chainsword. But how he acquires it is explored in this novel. He acquires it when he is not dismissed from the chapter, but hurling the Spear of Russ was a bit of a no-no, and Logan Grimnar, whilst not entirely against Ragnar's decisions, thought, I gotta get this kid out of here or the other elders will tear him apart, kind of deal. So Ragnar is sent to Holy Terror as a member of the Wolfblade. This is a unit established on Holy Terror to defend a navigator household, which is allied specifically to the Space Wolves. I believe these are called the House Belisarius. And Ragnar is sent to this house after one of the leading members of the household is assassinated. The novel seems to be a lot of fish out of water scenarios, as Ragnar finds himself in the corrupt yet lavish Terror. Huge structures, political machinations, that kind of plots of intrigue, high society that Fenris really isn't. Fenris is a frigid wasteland, the true north, but as a whole planet. Ultimately, Ragnar and the various individuals of the Wolfblade do defend the house against several assassinations, mutants, that kind of deal. In thanks, the Lady Gabriella Belisarius would gift him the legendary Frostblade, the chainsword that Ragnar would wield for the rest of his days. The fun part about Frostblade is that it was forged during the Great Crusade by artificers whose knowledge has essentially been lost to time. And that vignette doesn't completely close out with Wolfblade, but it is the last novel written by the author of these starting books. Now, Ragnar does have a couple of more novels in his own personal series called The Sons of Fenris, followed by Wolf's Honor. In these, Ragnar accompanies Gabriella to a routine inspection of the wolves' worlds, only to discover that bastard Thousand Suns sorcerer Maddox has been resurrected and is in alliance with the Dark Angels Fallen, with the purpose to influence a civil war between the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves. Now, Ragnar, of course, teams up with a Dark Angel individual named Jeremiah, and they team up and defeat the fallen commander. The Wolfblade then stumbles upon yet another plan of the Thousand Suns to bring Magnus over into real space, and somehow utilize the Spear of Russ to destroy the wolves. It is at this point that Ragnar returns to Logan Grimnar, chapter master of the wolves, and swears an oath to recover the spear or die trying. He then leads a strike team into a chaotic mirrored version of a besieged world, targeted as the fulcrum of this strange ritual to destroy the wolves. Ragnar confronts Maddox and kills him for good with the spear, ending the ritual and redeeming himself. Now, his next several engagements in lore were standard fare, very classic Space Marine stuff. Killing orcs, being elevated in rank, avenging people, saving people from chaos, etc. Now, hilariously stupid to me is a sort of duty and honor Space Marine horse crap. I don't know exactly the specifics, but there is a novel, Ragnar Blackmane, by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, that seems to have in it, there is a Dark Angel that Ragnar is honor bound to honor duel. And when fighting the Dark Angels in this honor duel, the Night Lords Trader Marines ambush the craft they are upon. In pursuing them, they find a derelict Flesh Tearers ship, a successor chapter of the Blood Angels. I did an episode on Gabriel Seth, chapter master of the Flesh Tearers. If you would like more on them. The ship was abandoned, and the wolf priests encouraged Ragnar to return the ship to the flesh tearer's homeworld of Cretacia. Upon arrival, Ragnar is almost executed for the simple fact of being a furry, but instead is banished to the wilds of the planet where he meets a flesh tearer's captain who serves as a sort of liaison between the chapters, sort of repairing any bad blood between them. Later on, during the very infamous Battle of Cadia, Ragnar and his flesh tearer buddy, recently promoted to a captain. He was not a captain to begin with, but by the Battle of Cadia, he is a captain. These two forces team up to help fight against the chaos. But, of course, his being Ragnar's Dark Angel Honor Jewel individual is also here. And he has to, of course, put his conflict with chaos to the side to frickin' honor jewel this guy in the middle of the war, with the flesh tearers being like, yeah, go on then. And I find this whole section of his story, it's just stupid, personally. I would like to think the book is written a lot better than the summary makes it sound, but I find this isn't a particularly exciting development of his character. I find it is a great example of the idiocy of Marines, the sort of stupid honor jewels stopping middle of a fight to fight each other. Like it doesn't seem very engaging to me, but we'll move on to what is Ragnar up to most recently. Psychic awakening occurs. This is when Cadia falls and the galaxy is split in twain. Big rift. From it, most factions, this is about 8th edition, maybe 7th edition, a lot of factions are having a push forward in the narrative. A lot of characters are being juiced up by the war being a lot more present. And Ragnar had a very shiny new model released for this campaign, alongside his would-be opponent, the Orc prophet Gazkul Magulrak Thraka. In this, Ragnar attempts to stop Gaz from his various crusades and conflicts. This is post-Wars for Armageddon, and he just believes Gaz needs to be stopped. At this point in his service, Ragnar has become quite good with his company in mastering the art of drop pod assault. Orbital shock assault is what he and his company do, the Black Wolves, descending from orbit as a sort of vanguard melee force. Of course, he goes straight for Gaz. He corners him and even manages to decapitate him. He kills Gazkul Thraka, but not before his own wounds took him straight to the apothecaries. Days of surgery would see that Ragnar is pushed through the Rubicon Primaris, going from the sort of first stage of Space Marines into this new modern era. He, of course, would be horrified that Gazkul got his own sort of Primaris treatment. Gazkul had his head stitched onto a big old brand new spanking body, a huge big mech style character represented by his current model. Ragnar would even crash an orbital station down in an attempt to slay Gazkul once more. And that's sort of Ragnar's whole story. He is a fan favorite by virtue of having a lot of novels. He's definitely been a thorn in the side of Key Thousand Suns plots. I think his time on Terra would be quite interesting to read about. How a space wolf engages with the nobility and lavishness of Terra. But personally, not too much more really strikes me. His most recent conflicts have been very brief mentions in other sort of campaign big battle events. We can talk a little bit about his war gear, of course. Ragnar has the Frost Blade that I mentioned earlier called Frost Fang. It's a custom chainsword with frost blades having chainsword teeth made of diamond-hard fangs, crafted from the jaws of ice krakens on the home world or from the hearts of icy glaciers. As well, he has the Company Master standard war gear known as the Belt of Russ, which is a sort of just icon of office. but a lot of the Space Wolves have a bit of a sort of a psychic reverence for a lot of icons, fangs, amulets, of all that sort of Viking-esque, imagery that helps their strength, it helps their defenses. It's what makes them very good against Thousand Sons and Psykers in particular, because they just don't give a damn. And he did also, I'll leave you know, he did used to have 2 Fenrisian wolves as companions. However, Ghazghkull made sure he did no longer have 2 Fenrisian wolf companions. But I feel like he could, totally go get some more. So that's Ragnar. Let us talk about our second character for today, Ulrik the Slayer, otherwise known as Grandfather Lupus, or even the Guardian of the Sons of Rus. Now, Ulrik is one of my personal favorites from amongst the roster of Space Wolves, but I have to admit, he doesn't have that much lore. He's kind of a character that has appeared in other people's narratives, as well being present for some of the big Warzone narratives such as Armageddon, which is less character-focused and maybe more faction-focused. Now, Ulrik is the High Priest of the Space Wolves. He is head honcho chaplain, but he never, he didn't always have such a title. Ulrik has been around since the rogue trader era, much like Ragnar, from the earliest of days of the Space Wolves, so despite not having so much lore, he's still a fan favorite. Now, besides our next character we'll talk about, Ulrik should be the oldest of the Space Wolves, serving for 700 years. And there is a bit of a canon conflict, because another character, Ulrik, spelt with a C instead of a K, was supposedly the individual responsible for recruiting, training, and then advising Logan Grimnar. This is problematic because Ulrik the Slayer would not become the Wolf Priest until after Logan Grimnar would even become the Great Wolf. So there's a bit of a canon conflict there. It could be just miswritten. A lot of people tend to take him on as the same character with just, in need of a bit of a retcon. But serving for 700 years, there's a good chance, even when he wasn't a Wolf Priest, that he was responsible for recruiting Logan. But back onto Ulrik's own story. He was originally a wolf guard, an elite bodyguard to a wolf lord. Ulrik had quite the epic deeds laying out to his name during the First War for Armageddon, when serving under a wolf lord named Kruger. Kruger, not much of a character, don't need to go into him. During the First War for Armageddon, which you can listen to in our episode The War for Armageddon or Warzone Armageddon, in that first war, the World Eaters are the main antagonists. Very berserker, heavy, bloodbath, melee, blending chaos force. Ulrik and his company would be charging the World Eaters head on. Such a charge would unfortunately prove fatal to the Wolf Lord, and despite having his weapons removed from him, Ulrik would still defend his dying lord, slaying personally 3 Khorne berserkers without his weapons, with such a battle fury that even Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, would commend him with a grim salute, letting him live. Following this conflict, Ulrik would earn his Slayer title, with the Wolf Guard of the company actually voting him to replace Kruger. He, however, declined, telling them that he is a warrior, not a leader. It would be his council following the First War for Armageddon, where the Imperium would essentially remove the knowledge of what the Inquisition did upon Armageddon by deploying the Grey Knights. Logan Grimnar and the various Space Wolves were extremely upset with their treatment of the Imperium, who just defended the planet, but it would be Ulrik that would prevent Logan's conflict from spilling out into the Imperium as a whole. And this would be the moment that he would decide to become a Wolf Priest, responsible for selecting and training recruits. Now, in recent years, about 100 to 200 years on from Armageddon, Ulrik has become even more aggressive, due in large to the fact that he is old. He knows he is old. He is in his twilight. And by the start of the Indomitus Crusade, he is a almost suicidally aggressive individual. He chooses the toughest targets on the battlefield and makes them his personal mark. Despite that, he would be still the High Priest. He would be counseling Logan Grimnar about various matters, including accepting the Primaris reinforcements. And he would also urge Logan to meet his fate at the hands of Ghazghkull Thraka, a prophecy that Njal Stormcaller experienced. And that's sort of it for Ulrik the Slayer. Not too much lore beyond that, but approximately 10 minutes before I hit record, Warhammer community announced a new Space Wolf novel called Kraken Blood, and they mentioned in the blurb that Ulrik gives a task to another wolf priest to go out and claim back a lost relic. I'm unsure what he will do or how heavily he will be featured in Kraken Blood, but it's nice to know that he has not been forgotten. One thing I really do enjoy about Ulrik is that he wears the Wolf Helm of Russ. Now, the Wolf Helm of Russ is a skeletal wolf-styled helmet that was supposedly fashioned by the Emperor's own artificers before the Great Crusade, given personally to Leman Russ at the founding of the Space Wolves. And over the millennia, it's somehow gained a bit of power of its own. Its gaze reinforces morale of the Space Wolves, as well striking terror in the opponents of Ulrik. And this will bring us to our third and final character for today, Bjorn the Fell-Handed, eldest, true claw, revered one, last of the company of Russ. So if Ragnar Blackmane is a fan favorite, Bjorn is probably the favorite. Bjorn, as you would know him today, is a venerable dreadnought model. But Bjorn has been around. He is, without any doubt, the oldest warrior of the Imperium, having been present alongside Leman Russ himself during the Great Crusade and then the Horus Heresy. Bjorn has existed as a model since the game's second edition, and with the writing of the whole Horus Heresy saga, Bjorn has gained a bit more lore overall. Bjorn's deeds themselves, however, are many, with the short story known as The Lone Wolf, detailing a tale of he and his pack, veterans of many conflicts against heretics and Xenos, being slayed by the Demon King Arjac, save for Bjorn himself. This short story comes from the later part of the Great Crusade. Now, Bjorn alone survived this massacre, saved personally by Leman Russ. And Bjorn would never forgive or forget the loss of his brothers, becoming overall melancholic and vengeful. Years later, Bjorn would end up beating Leman into battle with the Demon King, once becoming aware of his presence once more, claiming his vengeance. Leman would still, in the bloodbath of demons, gaze upon Bjorn, making his way out to the Demon King, evading death blows, and climbing the tall frame of the Demon King, only to tear out the Demon King's throat with his claw. Leman, proud of his son and extremely impressed, promoted him to personal wolf guard and granted him the title Fell-Handed. Now, this promotion would be laced, of course, with the unfortunate decision for Leman to bestow eventually Bjorn with leadership of the wolves in his eventual absence following the Siege of Terra into the Chaos home, the Eye of Terror. Bjorn had known loss and tragedy throughout the Great Crusade and the Heresy, and his strength of will and mind proved that he alone would be the best fit for command after Leman Russ. But during the Heresy, Bjorn would be present for the Battle of Prospero, which is where many believed he lost his arm wielding his claw, He would later be Russ's counsel against being simply the Emperor's executioner, encouraging him to pursue his own course of action, which would drive Lehman to seek out and do battle with Horus himself. And this is detailed in the novel Wolfsbane, another of the Horus Heresy titles. As well, collected in the anthology of Corax, another Horus Heresy novella titled Weirgeld, talks about a wounded Russ granting Bjorn his spear as a symbol of command. That bloody spear is back. Well, it always was, I suppose. So Bjorn is wielding the spear of Russ in command of whoever's on this planet. Corvus Corax, however, Primarch of the Raven Guard, would persuade them to evacuate before the traitor forces would claim their lives. But then following the heresy, Bjorn would still be in command until almost a millennia post Siege of Terra, where a fateful battle crippled him so that he was forced to be interred into a dreadnought. Despite his interment, he continued to fight at the vanguard of the Wolves for centuries more until the general fatigues of battle and his centuries of service and his melancholic feelings of being rejected by Russ and bitter at Russ's departure from the Wolves, all of these ingredients demanded that he would need to spend longer and longer in stasis sleeps. But prior to this, Bjorn was in almost every Space Wolf conflict from the Great Crusade to well after the Siege of Terra. In the novel Battle of the Fang, centuries after Bjorn was interred, Bjorn and a single company of wolves had to defend Fenris from Magnus and his 1,000 sons seeking revenge for the Battle of Prospero. Now, I would normally be a bit like, again? But this is actually pretty early on into the lore. And I'm not as sour on this plot point as I am in the 41st millennium, where every other day it seems the 1,000 Sons are just coming to beat up the wolves again. But in the Battle of the Fang, a novel that you can also read, Bjorn would be awoken as the logistics of the planetary defense became dire. Bjorn himself would be angry, furious even, at how so many forces of the wolves were deployed off-world. 11/12 of the Space Wolves were not around to defend, a machination quite possibly orchestrated by the 1,000 Sons themselves. Now Bjorn has the most experience, if that wasn't obvious, and his tactical acumen proved vital in resisting the initial invaders, but his form was demanded to enter combat when Magnus did indeed arrive upon Fenris in the material. Fighting from hangars to open fields, Bjorn would strike Magnus with weapon fire and blades in such a way that Magnus would actually be hurt, would experience pain for the first time in centuries. And this is because the actual dreadnought that Bjorn was interred in was a pretty old school relic style dreadnought, with a creation that was a lot more finesse than dreadnoughts you would expect to be. A lot more fluid movement, a lot more dynamic capabilities. So he could, in a sense, put up a fight against Magnus. And again, this is from a time in Black Library writing where the power scalings weren't so monstrously wide. People like Magnus were not the strongest thing to ever exist. Characters like Bjorn could put up an actual fight. And yes, he is a tin can. But remember what I said about how Space Wolves are adorned in runes, sacred artifacts, relics. The magics of the 1,000 Sons are really not so potent against the Space Wolves because of these relics and defensive tools, to the point where they really should choose a new nemesis. However, Magnus is Magnus and would start to get the upper hand on Bjorn, destroying both of his weapon arms, and yet Bjorn would still be trying to push Magnus off the cliff by headbutting him a bunch of times. Of course, reinforcements would arrive and help Bjorn push against Magnus, and the battle was, in a sense, won. But the Space Wolves fortress and their great company left upon the world would still need to be rebuilt, of which Bjorn would oversee. But following this conflict, Bjorn would be kept in stasis almost indefinitely. He would occasionally, maybe once a millennia, be brought out of stasis for his skills and wisdom of battle, but besides that would be awoken each century for the Space Wolf Great Feast, where tales of epic deeds are passed down from senior members to the new members. And Bjorn, of course, is revered for his knowledge and links to the past, and is seen with such reverence that he's almost on par with the Primarch. And his reputation is such that during the months of shame, where following the War for Armageddon, the Space Wolf entered into a protracted conflict with the Inquisition and Grey Knights, Bjorn ended the conflict with diplomacy after Logan Grimnar assassinated the key Inquisitor responsible for orchestrating the Civil War. Bjorn's status was so notorious that before his death, the Inquisitor and even the Grey Knights alongside him would feel compelled to kneel before him. Bjorn would broker a deal with the Ordo Malleus that a Grey Knight must return to Fenris with him so that they can explain to the wolves the nature of the Grey Knights, for the Grey Knights would not be forgotten so long as the wolves survived. And I've left my favourite fact of Bjorn to the end. Now, Bjorn has been around for so long, he's so ancient, and his force of spirit has become so powerful that the mirroring echo of Fenris inside the warp, the upside down, if you will, the reflection of Fenris within the warp, the battlements of the Space Wolf fortress known as the Fang, is watched over by the avatar of Bjorn himself, patrolling the battlements, resisting as much as he can the attempts of the Chaos Demons to materialize into real space. But of course, when he fights in real space, he is nonetheless still a dreadnought, adorned in lavish iconography, wolf pelts, armed with a special Hellfrost cannon that shoots freezing glacial bolts, as well wielding his iconic True Claw Power Claw, a homage to his fell-handed namesake. And that's 3 of 3. Bjorn, Ulrik the Slayer, and Ragnar Blackmane. These characters are still represented by models, with Ragnar being the only one of the 3 to have a more modern looking model, but their rules are all good. Very good, especially Ragnar and Bjorn, in my opinion. The episode after this one is going to be a Space Wolf Codex review, where we talk quite a while about all the various data sheets of these characters and their kin. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode. Definitely a bit light in the details, but I didn't want to spoil all the nitty-gritty of the plots of these various novels and novellas that I have talked about in today's episode. You're more than welcome to go ahead and dive deeper into the lore on your own, and I'm sure in the future, when I do these lore bites, I'll have a bit more time to make the scripts a little more unique. I am away at the moment on a holiday that's lasting several weeks, and so my scheduling for scripting, editing is not quite what it usually is. So this episode and a couple of others that I'm sure you'll see over the next month are a little bit more casual, but that's okay. We need something easy to listen to once in a while, don't we? All right. With that, I'm going to end the episode here. Thank you very much once again for listening. I hope you enjoy your hobbying, your painting, your gaming, whatever it is you're going to get up to. Remember to check out all the links in the bios. Join our community Discord. It's a fun time. At least it will be when you join. Leave some reviews on your various podcast platforms. Share it with your mates. And I'll catch you in the next one.